You're gonna
do the spiel.
welcome back.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of The Road Chose Me. Today, something a little bit different, a little bit special. We've been on the road over 6 months now in Australia. Actually, we've been here over a year. Took a while to build this thing, and we've got about 6 months left on the road to see as much as we can of Australia. And so we thought we would do a question and answer session, all the questions that you guys have asked across social media about the trip, about the Jeep, about us, about literally everything you asked us about. So without further ado, let's get into the questions. This is gonna be fun. Some of these are really funny. And so the first question here I've got, Felix from Patreon says, did you and Katie meet back in Canada, or did you meet once you were in Australia?
And I should note that it was Dan's idea to do this. So I'll let you answer that first one, Dan.
Oh, sure. So Katie and I did meet back in Canada. When I got back from Africa, I found a little ski mountain town. I rented a room and I was really happy there. COVID hit, got stuck. And then my roommate actually was a really good friend of Katie's. And so Sarah introduced us and we've been having adventures together ever since. We've been inseparable and it's been incredible.
Thanks, Sarah. The next question's from Bert's Puma on Instagram.
And Bert's Puma says, all right, so who's Katie?
And I'm Katie, so that's the big reveal. Thanks. I think that pretty much clears that up, right?
Katie doesn't want to talk about herself, so I will a little bit. Katie grew up in Canada. She worked as like a professional. She has a master's degree, worked for about 10 years.
Thanks, Dan.
But has always been like super outdoorsy. So I really fell in love with Katie because she goes ski touring, she goes on canoe trips, she goes hiking, like outdoors is Katie's priority. And so I straight away said, this is a person that I want to have in my life. And then I proposed this crazy idea of why don't we come to Australia and travel around? And at the time we were in lockdown in Canada, but Australia had no lockdown. So I kind of convinced Katie that we would be able to come here and be free of lockdown. And then of course we got to Australia and we got stuck in lockdown. So everything Dan says kind of fell apart, but anyway.
But it's okay, and it's been a great opportunity to be in Australia. We've got to spend lots of time with Dan's family, which was something we also were really looking forward to, which was great. And just a huge adventure and a big change for me, a step back from work and into other things. So it's been really interesting past year. I can't believe it's been almost a year.
Next question, Brian Eck from Patreon says, when you stayed at the Nudist Colony, did you partake? So just for anyone that didn't see it, when we were back in South Australia, we drove the Road Beach Run, a really famous beach route in Australia here. And it was really late and we were kind of exhausted and we needed somewhere to stay. And you weren't allowed just camp wherever you wanted because it's kind of a national park. And so we ended up staying in a Nudist Colony for the night, which was infinitely random.
So yeah, it was pretty interesting, and because it was cold, a lot of people who were partaking were just wearing puffy coats and nothing else, which was kind of an interesting look. Yeah.
Next question. Callum David on Facebook says, which do you prefer for overall overlanding, your Africa Wrangler or your Gladiator? Callum, I think about this a lot, and to be honest with you, they're not even really the same thing. They weren't built for the same purpose, and to compare them is a little bit like apples and oranges. So the Gladiator, it can carry 3 people, which immediately for what I wanted to do in Australia is better so that my family can come with us. It carries more fuel, it carries more water, it carries more fuel, more food, it has a better fridge, better cooking setup. It kind of is like a larger, bigger version of what I had in Africa, which for Australia is exactly what I wanted. Would I want this setup in Africa? Probably not. Would I want my Africa setup here? Probably not. So it's kind of like apples and oranges. One was really good in Africa and one's been really good here in Australia. So it's not really that I would prefer one over the other. It's kind of more about where am I taking them. And if it was really cold, like if we were up in the Canadian Arctic in winter, basically neither of them would be any good. So it's not like either of them is perfect for everything or anything like that. Yeah. Anything to add, Katie?
Well, I haven't lived in your Africa Jeep, but definitely in terms of some of the 4x4 exploring, we've been on some of the remoteness, like the Gladiator drives over anything, and it feels a lot lighter and more capable in a lot of ways than kind of the Wrangler is a bit top heavy, and it's very stable. It's very like safe and secure when you're inside of it, but it doesn't have the same kind of responsiveness as driving the Gladiator, which definitely was something that you wanted to prioritize over this trip. And we've had no trouble on anything. I actually do a lot of driving of this guy, and it's been so smooth sailing. And obviously it's Australia, it's super safe. There's tons of great wild camping. So camping in the swag is no problem. I don't know if I would have been super comfortable camping in a swag in Africa in some of the places it sounds like you guys were camping in. So yeah, very different trips, I imagine.
Yeah, different trips, different priorities, different pros and cons. Yeah. On that same vein, John Pitha from Patreon says, are you happy with the Gladiator overall? Yeah, absolutely, John. Extremely happy. It is way smoother, way quieter, way more powerful than my Wrangler was. It gets better fuel economy, which is a big priority. It means I'm spending less money just to drive it every day. Inside, it's luxurious, leather heated seats, Bluetooth everything, air conditioning. It's really quiet. So driving, even long driving days, are not exhausting. And then, yeah, it's the first pickup truck I've ever had, the first ute. And so that's been a big learning curve. How do you kind of pack for that? But overall, yeah, I think it's been an incredible vehicle. And like Katie said, it will drive over anything. And even when I think it won't, it does it without even getting wheel spin. So yeah, it's an impressive vehicle. Rich Curtis, and maybe I'll point this at Katie first. Rich Curtis on Patreon says, now that you've been traveling in Australia, has it made you want to stay, or will Canada still be home base after all of this?
Point this at me.
Yeah.
Well,
does it make you want to stay in Australia? Do you love it?
It's been really interesting. Today was a perfect summer day for me. It was about 24, 25 degrees. It's gorgeous. There's like a little breeze. It's been like 15 overnight. So it's just like dreamy, very similar to the summers we get in the Kootenays. And it is, the coldest days they ever get here. So I think I would probably melt into a puddle if we lived in Australia full time. That'd definitely be a challenge for me.
Yeah, this is literally the coldest day of the year here where we are right now. And so, yeah, for Katie, it's perfect, but it would definitely be very hot and humid if it was summer. Yeah. And I do love it. I have enjoyed it a lot here and I really like it, but I'm not going to stay here. We are actually going back to Canada, and I will live in Canada for the rest of my life when I'm not on the road. I don't plan on living in Australia. I'll always come back to see family. I'll always come back for adventures, but we have no plans of living here. Yeah.
And culturally, it's super similar to Canada. I was shocked. It's often been almost surprising to me. Parts of Canada feel more different than Australia does to where we live in Canada. But it's definitely a very different place and a different lifestyle than what I'm used to in Canada anyway. And it's really far away. Like, I've lived in Europe, I've lived in Africa. Like, I didn't think it would be so difficult being on the other side of the world, but it's a huge, distances mean a very different thing, and the time difference is incredibly strange. Yeah.
It is definitely all of those things. CJ on Patreon has got quite a few questions here, so I'll go rapid fire. He says, what camera gear do you use? And so this question comes up all the time, and I'll reel it off quickly, but there is a link down in the description of this video to all the camera gear if you want to check it out. The camera we're talking to right now is a Sony A7 Mark III. It has a 24-70 f4 lens on the front of it, the Carl Zeiss lens. That's my go-to camera for stills and video usually, but as well as that for video now, I have a couple of GoPros as well. Those are Hero 8 Black editions, and I have the media mod for it so I can attach my wireless microphones. We are using those wireless microphones right now. That's what you can hear. They are Samronic. I read a bunch of reviews. They're cheaper, but they're still good quality instead of spending the huge money. I also have a Manfrotto tripod. The drone is a Mavic Mini, the original, the OG Mini. Now I think they're up to version 3 or 3 Pro or something. A stack of memory cards, a stack of big hard drives. All of it is inside big Pelican cases, ones that went all the way around Africa with me, and now they're in this Jeep as well. I've got a zoom lens. I've got a Trick f1.8 20mm lens that goes on the Sony for my star photography. Lots and lots of camera gear, obviously lots of chargers. Lots of my electronic setup is all about charging it. But yeah, there's a link in the description if you're a photography buff and you want to learn more. check that out.
I have an iPhone.
It's good. CJ also says, I want to overland internationally, but I'm very conflicted about vehicles. Choosing between a Toyota 4Runner and a Jeep Wrangler Unlimited. Of the two, is it impossible to overland internationally in anything but the Jeep? Absolutely not, CJ. No, that is not true. I think these days, any vehicle made in the last 10 or 20 years is absolutely capable of going around the world. And it really depends on you and what kind of trip you want to have. Do you want to be camping a whole bunch? Maybe you want a vehicle that can easily have a pop-up roof, and interior living space. Or if you don't care about camping and you're going to stay in hotels, then it doesn't really matter. Or how far off road do you want to get kind of means how strong of a four-wheel drive do you need. But in terms of parts availability and things like that, I think people put a huge emphasis on it and it isn't that big of a deal. I didn't really meet anyone in Africa that, had such a major failure that they couldn't continue their trip. You will always find a way to get parts or get repairs. Things can be sent around the world these days. But even then, if you buy a vehicle that's only 10 years old, do you really expect to have like major engine problems or need a gearbox rebuild or something? It's really unlikely. So my advice would be, don't worry about the brand that's on the front of the car. Think more about the trip you want to have and, how you want to outfit that vehicle so you can enjoy your trip. So if you want to camp, make camping really comfortable. If you want to cook your own food, have a really nice kitchen like we do, because then you can cook really good food. That I think is more important than the badge that's on the front. And then CJ, final question, says, do you miss having the pop-up roof for sleeping on this trip? And yeah, no doubt, CJ, the pop-up roof is more luxurious, but of course it has its downsides as well. That Jeep was top heavy. It was really expensive, that pop-up roof. Getting one over here would be ridiculously expensive. Basically, had I put some sort of camper on the back of the Gladiator, the amount I would have spent on the camper is the entire budget for the whole trip. So it's either own a Gladiator with a really wicked camper or own a Gladiator, sleep in the swag and go and have an adventure. So you kind of know where I fall on that decision. Katie slept in the pop-up roof a few times. You didn't love climbing up into it.
It's pretty tall if you think about like how tall you're climbing up on top of an already lifted Jeep and big tires, and then getting up and down in the middle of the night, in the dark, in the rain, in bear-infested Canada. But it definitely also comes with some advantages. Definitely when we've had the rain or the dust or sand or bugs, ants, whatever it is, I'm sure it's really nice to be up off the ground. Yeah.
So yeah, pros and cons, CJ. I think, both can work. And as always, I think it's more about getting out and having the adventure than it is about, your particular thing that you have on your vehicle. I'll try to fire a question here to Katie. Oh yeah, so Mark Blackmore on Facebook says, how is Katie doing being away from Canada with the reverse seasons?
It is so disorienting. It's actually, I find the summer in Canada and then the winter here kind of the easiest time, but it kind of lulls you into a false sense of security. So I arrived here in Australia in the Australian winter, and I use my winter because it was literally exactly the same temperature and weather, and almost like the days were a bit short, but it was pretty similar, similar vibe. And so then things got crazy, and it made me feel like I was traveling back in time, or that people were 6 months behind me. So it's been extremely disorienting. Yeah.
And even now, like we just video chatted all of our friends in Canada, and for them, they're in like glorious sunshine and sunsets and they're having a great time. And so are we. But they're in their full summer and we're in our full winter. So disorienting is definitely the way to say it.
Yeah. And we've done this pretty well. I think this might tap into another question down the road, but because we headed further south, which is colder, for the summer, we've basically been in this sweet spot of weather where it's been kind of like 20 or 25 degrees for the past year of our lives, or even longer than that, 18 months almost. And then, yeah, so you're wearing the same set of clothes, it's the same extremes. The sun is super intense. I definitely noticed that a lot. It's a completely different quality of light than anywhere else I've ever been in the world. Yeah, it's been kind of the static temperature, so I find it really hard to keep track of time.
I agree with all of that. Next question, Matthias Mueller from Patreon says, how much does the support of Patreons help pay for the trip? It helps immensely, Matthias. Essentially, we wouldn't be able to do this trip if it wasn't for the people supporting us on Patreon and helping us to be able to get out here on the road, put fuel in the tank. We're paying $6 or $7 US a gallon. That's just sort of everyday normal price. And if we go anywhere remote, it's more like $7 to $8 to $9 a gallon. So certainly the fuel is a lot more expensive than I budgeted for. So yes, the support of Patreons makes it possible. We couldn't do it without you guys. So thanks hugely to all the supporters. And if there's anything that you guys ever want, reach out to me on Patreon and just ask, and I'll get it for you. Oh, this is a question maybe Katie and I can both answer. So Katie, Alan Hipman from Patreon says, what are your top 3 learnings from this trip to apply to the next one?
I need to think about that one for a
Yeah,
minute.
Katie didn't get teed up. I thought about this one already for a little bit. So top 3 learnings. My first one would be, what is the priority of your trip and how are you going to make that happen? So Africa was sort of just an adventure every day and I didn't really have to think about it. But this trip we brought surfboards for a while. I really wanted to bring a mountain bike. We've got lots of hiking gear with us. And then so sort of on any given day, we get a bit conflicted, like, should we go do this amazing 4-wheel driving route, which kind of just means sit in the Jeep all day? Should we go mountain biking? Should we go surfing? Should we go hiking? And they're sort of all like separate or conflicting of each other. You can't do them all at the same time. So I would say like trip priority has been like a recurring theme on this one that we've had to like think about it. What are you actually trying to do? Do you just want to go 4-wheel driving every single day? If so, that's great, go and do it. But if you want to do other things, how do you kind of fit the jigsaw puzzle together? It's probably my number one, I think.
I'd have to agree with that too. I think that we've had that conversation a lot, like what is the trip? Like what's it all about? And yeah, where are your priorities lying? So especially like here in Australia, there are so many options and the distances are huge and there's a really limited amount of time just because of the seasons and how far away things are apart from each other. So you really have to make some pretty big decisions and that's definitely been a hard, just a hard line to walk given all the different things that we want to do all over the country. So I'd agree with that.
Another thing that's kind of impacted us more on this trip than my previous ones is rain. I promised Katie it wasn't going to rain in Australia, but I lied. It's been raining a lot, like more than in the last 100 years.
So much rain.
And it's interesting, our awning keeps us really dry. We have like decent hangout space, but slowly over time things get wet or even just damp. You know, our rain jackets, our shoes, everything just slowly gets wet. And actually the bigger problem is how do you dry it all out? Because it's not like you have a house to go back to, or you can't just kind of hang it all up somewhere. So it's kind of an interesting thing. I've really been daydreaming about having a diesel heater to heat the living space, and not really because we want the warmth, but because we want to be able to dry out everything when it gets wet. So something else I've thought a lot about.
Yeah, when we came back from Hinchinbrook Island, the humidity, it must have been like 97% humidity or something like that. So even though, you know, we were able to actually have a lot of dry area where it wasn't actively raining, there was just no way anything was going to dry until it stopped raining, basically, which was really challenging. Yeah.
Question for you, Katie. Kevin Burke on Facebook says, what was the best spot on Fraser Island?
Ooh. But I actually really loved some of the interior forests. There's some really beautiful short hiking tracks. There's a 100-kilometer great walk, but you can do little sections of it. So especially near Central Station, there's a really beautiful section boardwalk that goes by this crystal clear creek. And I just thought it was the coolest rainforest in there. So I would actually say that, I like the forests on Fraser Island. And some beautiful four-wheel driving in there as well. Really interesting. Yeah.
Unexpected answer. Kevin, my favourite spot was definitely the northern tip. I felt like it was a bit of a mission to get through Ngala Rocks and it felt like an achievement. You know, it's kind of like iconic Australian four-wheel driving. And then you unlocked this like paradise of wilderness and remoteness, and there weren't many people up there. Watching the sunrise and sunset was gorgeous. The sand dunes up there were really special. So yeah, for me, getting to that northern section, not only was it beautiful, it was also like a real achievement. I loved it.
Yeah.
David Buckland on Facebook says, as you're getting more experienced, older, thanks David, I appreciate that. He says, do you think about living in a hard-sided camper? Yeah, David, for sure. You know, like one of those Unimogs or an Iveco or a big Mercedes truck or something with a box on the back of it. Like, I think that's a really good way to go. I think a lot of people enjoy doing that. Will I get there one day? I don't know. It'll probably depend where I want to go and if I have enough money for that kind of thing. But for now, we love sleeping in our tent. We love hiking. We love being out in the wilderness. And I think I enjoy like being down at ground level, so to speak, and kind of keeping it all a bit simpler and a bit lighter and being able to drive on small tracks and things like that. And we've really noticed it here in Australia because a lot of the vehicles are small. Like the Gladiator is actually big by Australian standards. And so in the deserts and even on the islands, like on Fraser Island, regular four-wheel drives in Australia can navigate these tracks no problem. But you come across, like we found an F-150 on one of the tracks and it was really struggling. It basically didn't fit at all. Or you read about a Unimog trying to drive there and the track width is so wide that the tires are just driving in like the really sharp pointy sticks on either one side or the other because they're wider than the regular tire track. So I think when I think about going around the world or where I want to go next, I would prefer to like be more sort of smaller, more contained so that I can go places that kind of any vehicle can go. If locals are driving there in a beat up old Toyota pickup, that's where I want to be able to go, some remote lake or mountain or whatever it is.
I had to laugh when I read that question because my mom always talks about, you know, when she goes on hiking trips and there's like the year where everyone gets walking sticks and then there's the year where everyone gets reading glasses. And I feel like we're at the year where we're going to get inflatable pillows for our backpacking trips. I feel like that's like the stage that, anyway, that's the big thing that I thought about when I read that.
I'm still resisting it, but it's coming.
It's just, I don't know. Don't you think it'd make your neck happy?
It would.
Yeah.
It would, but it would make me feel old. So. Next question, Robert Voss on Instagram says, what are your plans for the Gladiator after the trip? Robert, that's a really good question and it's been a difficult decision, but all along this was only going to be an Australia trip. This is only an Australian vehicle. So the plan without a doubt is that I'm going to sell it before the end of this year, probably at the end of November. I'll put it up for sale exactly as it sits now, completely ready to go. So if anyone watching, I'm genuinely serious, shoot me a message on Instagram, on Facebook, and we can get chatting. This will be fully outfitted, equipped, ready for adventure. Everything included, the cutlery, the pots, the pans, my tools, spare parts.
Map books.
Everything ready, maps, everything ready to hit the trail here in Australia at the end of November this year. So, yep, gonna sell it and move on. It's sad, but that's what I have to do. Question for Katie. Roy Golan on Instagram says, what are your top 3 favorite books?
That'll actually be a follow-up episode. I will arrange them by genre, author. Yeah, I've been reading a lot on this trip, so that's a very overwhelming question for me. I'm gonna have to think about it a
Quick
bit
fire
more.
though, 1 or 2. You got something?
I don't think I have anything. Would you say Jupiter's Travels?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say, sorry, who was this, Roy? I'm gonna have to say Jupiter's Travels, the OG Overlander. Ted Simon is just a legend, and I've met him a couple of times and I always get giddy and turn into a bit of a fanboy. So that's epic for me.
Your books, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, of course.
Shameless plug. Yeah.
Ishmael is a book that I really love, written by Daniel Quinn. It's kind of about the environment and how humans, what is our role on Earth and how do we fit into like the environmental systems. It's one of those books that it's a bit like when Copernicus figured out that the sun doesn't go around the Earth, but the Earth goes around the sun. So it's like that, where suddenly your whole perspective changes and you say like, oh, whoa, it's actually not at all what I thought was going on. So I loved Ishmael, is a really good book.
I've been reading a lot of Australian books since I came to Australia, which has been a really beautiful way of getting to know the landscape a little bit better and also just learn some of the history and culture. It's really similar to Canada, just the relationship with people and the land and the landscape and the history, but it's very, very different too, obviously. So I've really enjoyed reading some books about the places where we are when we're in them. So that's something I've really been trying to get into the past couple months.
And I'll throw some links down in the description too, to the ones I mentioned and to any that Katie can come up with. Thomas Mullins on Facebook says, what's a rough ballpark cost for international overland travel and what are some tips to budget for it? So Thomas, actually I did a whole video on this. I'll throw a link, it'll be up there. It's everyone I've ever met on the road, we always talk about money because all of us are running out of it and we want our trip to go for as long as possible. Basically, everyone spends between $1,500 and $2,500 a month for absolutely all expenses. That's US dollars. That includes fuel, flights, national parks, food, accommodation, absolutely everything. And the range there is because it's up to you. If you camp every single night and cook all of your own food, you could even get it as low as $1,000 a month. But if you want to stay in resorts, if you want to drink a bottle of wine and eat steak every night, you probably bump it up to $3,000 or $4,000 or $5,000 a month. The sky is the limit. But I would say most people are closer to that $1,500 a month because they're trying to make their trip go for longer. So check it out. There's a whole video. I go into a lot of detail about that. And to budget for your trip, some people do it like that, dollars per month. Some people do it as dollars per mile. And I've often heard it said that you spend about $1 per mile, which is an interesting way to think about it because the further you drive, the more you spend because fuel is the biggest expense. So, you know, if we drove all around all of Australia in 1 month, it'd be a very expensive month. But obviously also if we chose to go nowhere for a month, it would be a really cheap month. So yeah, a couple of different ways you can look at it and think about it. Checkmate427 on Instagram says, do you miss the tan Jeep? Katie, do I miss the tan Jeep?
Every day I look at what time it is when Dan first mentions Sandy, and
the name of that Jeep is Sandy.
Yeah, we just have a moment.
We reminisce about Sandy.
Yeah.
And Checkmate says, and what is the next adventure in it? Well, the next adventure will be going back to Canada and getting it out of storage. So it's in a friend's garage right now. And he's been starting it up once a month and looking after it.
Dan sends postcards. Yeah. Sometimes we FaceTime. That's okay.
Fingers crossed it'll still be in pretty good condition when I get back. But the adventure will be get it out of storage, get some winter tires on it, get it ready for winter, because by the time I get back in December, there's going to be a good amount of snow on the ground. And then, so we'll have a winter, and then I have to figure out what I'm doing with it. I'm working on a long-term sort of home for it. So Mark Parry on LinkedIn says, what are your thoughts on not using a dedicated four-wheel drive for overlanding? Mark, plenty of people have driven around the world in not a four-wheel drive. The Van Ortons, Brad and Sheena, they wrote a book called 927 Days of Summer. I'll put a link in the description. They drove around the world in an old VW van, and some of their best experiences were when the vehicle got stuck or when the vehicle broke down, because it allowed them to meet and interact with locals. And so, you know, if it hadn't gotten stuck in that crazy mud pit in Kazakhstan, they never would have been invited to that wedding and that whole sort of scenario of meeting all the locals. So I think they would tell you they enjoyed their trip more because they didn't have such a capable four-wheel drive that could literally drive through anything. So yes, definitely, if you're thinking about it, it is a very, very valid option, and you definitely will have a great trip. And then the final question for tonight, before this video gets too long, Felix on Patreon says, what's the next destination after Australia?
Canada! We're going back to Canada.
We're definitely going back to Canada, Felix. We're going to regroup, we're going to save up some money, and plans are afoot on the next vehicle, probably the next vehicle, and also the next international destination. And so you guys over on Patreon are going to start getting details on that very soon. And so if anyone's curious, this is my plug. Head over to Patreon. There is a link in the description. You get behind the scenes content, you get early access, you get one-on-one video calls with me about your trip, about your vehicle, all of that kind of stuff, as well as now upcoming a whole new vehicle build. It's going to be something very special and a new trip to a part of the world that neither of us have ever been to, and we're pretty excited about. So that's all over on Patreon. That's my plug. Now it's time to wrap up the video. Thanks for joining us, Katie. Thanks, that was fun.
Thank you.
What did you learn?
I learned all sorts of things.
Learned all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So thanks very much for watching, guys. Have fun out there on the road, and just maybe we'll bump into you one day. We have to show them the goats.
We should show them the goats.
We should show you guys the goats. Let's go have a look at the goats. Hello, Heidi. How are you?
Heidi.
Heidi hasn't quite warmed up to us yet, and she won't come over for scratches. And we are standing behind an electric fence, so I'm not going to get too much closer, although I sometimes love playing with electric fences.
Heidi.
This is Heidi, and then over here, sitting right up high, that's Louie, and he's the biggest goat I've ever seen in my life, but he's not feeling social right now. These are our goat friends. Say goodbye to the goats.
Bye, goaties. I'm a monkey. Hi.
That could be in the outtakes.
Is it filming right now?
Yeah.
Great. This was Dan's idea.
It was a good idea.